What is up, guys? So yesterday I went to go see Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and I really wanted to review it, so here's this video. This was easily my most anticipated movie of the month, even though Aquaman is coming out in December as well, and probably my most anticipated movie of 2018 right behind Infinity War. And the reason I was so excited is because, one, I just love Spider-Man. He's my favorite superhero, and even though this is mostly Miles Morales, I mean Peter Parker is here as well. This is the first big budget animated Spider-Man movie, so I was just very excited. Also, the trailers looked amazing. The animation in the trailers and the overall feel of the trailers, this movie looked really good. But the question is, does it live up to my expectations, which were pretty high based off the trailers and the fact that the reviews are insane? It currently has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is insane. Well, let's find out what I thought about the movie. The main characters of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse are Miles Morales, Peter Parker, and Spider-Gwen, with Spider-Man Noir, Spider-Ham, and Penny Parker as supporting characters. And I definitely do think that out of these characters, Miles and Peter really shine as not only just the best characters of the movie, but just generally great characters, which was intentional. I mean, they are the main focus of the movie, so it makes sense that they are the best characters in the movie. They're actually given arcs in the movie. They're really, really well developed, three-dimensional, really likable, and compelling characters in this movie. Spider-Gwen is given some development as well and is a generally great character, but she definitely isn't given nearly as much development as Miles or Peter, and I think that she could have used just some extra development in terms of the other Spider Squad members. Spider-Ham and especially Spider-Man Noir are hilarious characters, which I will go over again when I talk about the comedy of the movie, which was great in this movie. And then there's Penny Parker, who I definitely think was easily the worst of these Spider Squad members, because unlike Spider-Man Noir and Spider-Ham, she wasn't a very funny character, and much like Spider-Man and Spider-Man Noir, she wasn't given any development or any arc. Something happened to her at the end, which I won't spoil, but I just feel like it was tacked on at the end to give her something to do, because in this movie she was just there for, I think, just there for the anime style animation, which was pretty cool in the movie, but I feel like she was just there for that. But getting back to the good characters in this movie, Spider-Man aka Miles Morales and Spider-Man aka Peter Parker. If you've seen the trailers, you would know that this version of Peter Parker is not the regular Peter Parker. He's been Spider-Man for 22 years, which means he's probably 37 years old, because most Spider-Man become Spider-Man, or most Peter Parkers become Spider-Man at 15. So he's 37, which is a lot older than most Spider-Man, and he's very down on his luck, and nothing really is going his way, which I think fits in the movie extremely well, where he is given this very compelling arc dealing with that through his mentorship-like role and relationship with Miles Morales, which is something I feel like this movie did incredibly well. The character of Peter Parker, well, this is definitely not the best version of Peter Parker, which I felt like we got our best version of Peter Parker this year in Spider-Man PS4, but this is definitely a different take on Peter Parker that has a different type of compelling role, and I do think this movie did that incredibly well. So Miles Morales, the main character of this movie, was really, really good. This is probably the best version of Miles Morales ever put to not only screen, but anything in general. He's much more likable, much more compelling than any version of the character before, including TV shows, video games, and comic books. Much like Peter, Miles is given this very compelling arc, which includes some very emotional moments, as well as the climax of his arc, which is just so satisfying to watch, which I don't think this is a spoiler. It's just when he becomes Spider-Man. Up until this point, he isn't really doing very well as Spider-Man, and this is basically his origin story, which I felt like was a very compelling origin story. But when he becomes Spider-Man, it is just so satisfying to watch. A big part of that is also the animation in scenes like that. It's just incredible, which I will talk about the animation of this movie in a minute, because it is definitely really, really good. But I do think that this arc in general with Miles Morales and the character in general of really the main character of this movie is easily the best Miles Morales ever put to film, or ever put to any screen, or really anything ever, which I do think is a major accomplishment for this movie, and the character in general was great. Earlier, I mentioned that Spider-Ham and Spider-Man Noir were really funny characters, and they definitely were not alone. This movie was so much funnier than I expected it to be. For instance, Spider-Ham was used as this cartoony character inside of a cartoon, making the whole world feel much more realistic compared to him, which was really funny. But then there's Spider-Man Noir, which I felt like was easily the funniest character in this movie, which really sets him above the other two side characters in the Spider Squad, which are Penny Parker and even Spider-Ham. The fact that they used his universe's setting, which was a black and white, literally depressing 1933, in contrast with the extremely colorful universe that this movie takes place in, made for really funny moments. Also, a bunch of really funny moments in this movie derived from references to Spider-Man, Spider-Man's universe, Spider-Man movies and TV shows, even to the point where they made fun of previous Spider-Man movie and TV shows. And there's this whole end credit scene that you definitely should stick around for, which was hilarious. Although, while this movie was definitely really funny, I do think that the good comedy derived from all those references and the contrast between Spider-Man Noir's universe and this one, but I do think there was some not so great comedy, which was slapstick humor. The slapstick humor in this movie was just a little too much. I do think it was funny, like really funny at the beginning of the movie because it was never seen before in this movie, but then you get closer to the end and then you get to the end and the slapstick humor just keeps on piling on and on and on, and it gets annoying. This isn't a deal breaker for the movie. It's just one thing in this movie that I didn't like. By the end of the movie, they had this one slapstick humor that cut the tension of a fight scene, which happened a lot in the movie, and I didn't like it that much. I wanted to see that fight scene, for instance, and I think that by the time that happened, which you probably noticed in the movie, it is annoying. So I think the slapstick humor in the movie was, again, not a deal breaker, but definitely something I didn't love about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So a big part of why the trailers for this movie looked so good was the animation. The animation looked completely different from any animated movie come before because it felt like it really tried to do this comic book style with the animation, which I do think turned out to do a pretty great service for this movie. It made the movie feel completely different from any other animated movies. It felt like the movie was more faithful to comic books just because it felt like a comic book put on the screen. But not only the animation and the style, I think that the colors in the movie, the way colors were used like as a background to scenes where, I mean, the background should just be a normal background, but they use colors instead, which is something they do in a lot of comic books to show dramatic effect. That was pretty great as well. Just the colors in general in this movie really pop, making the movie look really colorful and really good at the same time. And a big part of that also is the great animation and great art style of all the characters. They also use different types of art styles for different characters, like I mentioned earlier, the anime art style for Penny Parker or the more cartoony art style for Spider-Ham. Those really translated well, and they definitely were great in this movie. So this movie isn't perfect. Like I said, the slapstick humor was a little too much at times, but I also think the main villain of this movie wasn't great. Some villains that were confirmed in the trailers were Green Goblin, the Kingpin, Prowler, and Scorpion. I won't go over who the main villain is because that is kind of a spoiler that was not given away in the trailers, but I do think the main villain was just not as good as I would have hoped. I think his motivation was maybe a little bit lacking, or it was good motivation, but it should have been developed a little bit more. I think the voice actor was maybe not amazing in the role. I mean, he wasn't a bad voice actor or anything, but he had this accent that the character doesn't usually have that was maybe a little bit distracting. So the main villain, not amazing or anything, obviously not a bad character, like not a bad villain by any stretch of the word, but a lot less good than I would have expected. Although I do think it's actually fine because the main focus of this movie are the spider people, which that was handled very well. But there's this other villain, Prowler, who in the comics is Aaron Davis, the uncle of Miles Morales, which is the same case in this movie, who I felt was great in this movie. The other villains were not nearly as good as Prowler. He looked really cool. He was very scary in some scenes, and his connection to Miles Morales made for some impactful moments that was great in this movie. I wish that the character of Prowler was used a little bit more, maybe as even the main villain, as opposed to who the main villain was in the movie. So one thing I've been seeing a lot of people say about this movie is that it is the best Spider-Man movie ever made, and in terms of that, I'm honestly not sure. It's obviously, for me, between this and Spider-Man Homecoming. If you count Spider-Man PS4 as a movie, then that would win, but obviously it's not a movie, although parts of it is. But for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse versus Spider-Man Homecoming, I am not sure. I think they're basically tied. It's just they're very, very different movies. They are trying to accomplish different things. They're different styles in terms of one of them's live action, one of them's animated. It's hard to compare both of them in terms of, like, one of them you can't really talk about the acting, the other one you can't talk about how the animation looks because there is no animation. So honestly, I'm not exactly sure which one's better. If I had to say right now, even because I just watched the movie yesterday, I've never rewatched it, I will probably like Spider-Man Homecoming a little bit more just for the rewatchability. I don't think I will be able to rewatch this movie nearly as much as Homecoming. In conclusion, this movie offered us some pretty incredible characters in Miles and Peter, as well as the rest of the Spider Squad, some really funny moments from Spider-Man Noir and Spider-Ham, as well as great Spider-Man in-jokes and Marvel Comics references, which all felt like a great homage and love letter to Spider-Man, including incredible animation, which was just stunning. The movie looked really, really good. Some things I didn't go over in this review was the overall message of the movie, which is the fact that anybody could be Spider-Man, which is metaphorical, but I did like that message in the movie, as well as this universe feeling a little bit different from most Spider-Man universes or the normal Spider-Man universe, which I did like in this specific movie because it made the movie that much more interesting. Also, it just looks different from most Spider-Man universes, so they definitely pulled that off. Obviously, there were some things I didn't love, which was the main villain and the over-reliance on slapstick humor, but those are minor things compared to all the great things in this movie, so I will give Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse a 9.6 out of 10. So anyway, if you've already seen the movie, let me know in the comments down below what you thought about it. If you haven't seen the movie yet, then let me know if you're excited about the movie in the comments down below. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.